Hello everyone, viewers. We all know the Palace of Versailles, a universe of gold, mirrors, and absolute power. A sun-drenched testament to a king who declared, "I am the state." But what if I told you that the foundation of this dazzling world of light isn't built on solid ground? What if it is built on a promise made to a kingdom of darkness, a silent empire of the dead stretching for miles direct? This isn't a story about architecture or politics as we know them. It is about the secret pact between the Sunday King and the shadows, a story etched not in gold leaf but in bone. We think of Versailles as the pinnacle of order, a triumph of human will over nature. But just below the surface, another order exists. An older one, an empire of silence where 6 million souls wait and watch. The story of It's a tale of a young man caught between them. An apprentice architect named Julian, who stumbled upon a truth that was never meant to see the light of day. It begins, as all things in that age did, in the shadow of the king. The year is 1682. Versailles is a symphony of construction, the air thick with the dust of cut marble and the scent of damp earth. Julian was just one of thousands, a face in the crowd of artisans, stonemasons, and architects, all laboring to manifest the king's celestial vision on earth. His master, a stern but brilliant man named Monsieur Lebrun, was obsessed with symmetry, with the divine geometry that Louis XIV believed was the language of God and kings. To Julian, Versailles was a universe unto itself. He spent his days drafting the precise curvature of a fountain basin or calculating the load-bearing capacity of a new colonnade. He believed in the logic of stone and the immutable laws of physics. He believed in what he could see and touch. His nights were spent poring over ancient texts on architecture, studying Vitruvius and Palladio, dreaming of one day building something that would darkness. To him, was simply the absence of light. A problem to be solved with more windows or a well-placed candelabra. He had no concept of a darkness that was a place, a power, a kingdom. That ignorance was a blessing he was about to lose forever. It started with a discrepancy, a tiny flaw in the grand design. Lebrun had tasked him with reviewing the original foundational plans for the main palace, deep within the archives, surrounded by the dry, papery scent of forgotten documents. Julian unrolled a massive sheet of vellum. It was one of the earliest drafts, its ink faded to a ghostly brown. And there, in a corner most would overlook, was a small, almost imperceptible symbol. It wasn't an architectural notation. It was a spiral interwoven with a straight line. He'd seen it before, but where? He dismissed it as a draftsman's flourish and continued his work. But the symbol snagged in his mind. Later that week, while surveying the site for a new wing, he saw it again, etched into the base of a freshly laid foundation stone, almost hidden by mud. This was no flourish. It was deliberate. A message, a secret signature. That night, he saw it carved into every stone of Versailles. A hidden lattice of power beneath the gleaming facade. He woke in a cold sweat. The image of the serpent and spear burned into his mind. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this symbol was a key. But he couldn't imagine the lock it was meant to turn. His obsession began to affect his work. His lines were less. "The stone does not forgive a wandering mind, Julian," he warned, his voice as sharp as a chisel. "Your focus is on the heavens," he gestured to the rising palace, "not on ghosts in the margins." But Julian couldn't let it go. He began his own secret investigation. He started frequenting the taverns where the quarrymen and masons drank, listening to their stories. These were men who worked in the earth. They spoke of the ground beneath Paris, not as solid earth, but as a honeycomb of ancient tunnels. Roman-era limestone quarries that snaked for miles in every direction, a vast and unmapped labyrinth. They called it the Void. A place of sudden collapses, strange echoes, and lost souls. One evening, an old mason, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and his hands like gnarled roots, saw Julian sketching the symbol on a napkin. The old man's eyes widened, and he made a sign to ward off evil. He grabbed Julian's wrist with surprising strength. "You meddle with things you don't understand, boy," he rasped. his voice low and urgent. "There are two kingdoms, the one of the sun," he jerked his head towards Versailles, "and the one below. The serpent belongs to the earth, the spear belongs to the king. You cannot hold both." Before Julian could ask what he meant, the old man drained his wine, threw a coin on the table, and disappeared into the night, leaving Julian with more questions than answers. The serpent and the spear, the kingdom of the old man's words were a prophecy, a riddle that coiled around the symbol in his mind. He realized the plans in the archive were incomplete. He needed to see what lay beneath. He needed a map of the void. Finding such a map was close to impossible. The quarries were officially closed, deemed too dangerous. Knowledge of their layout was fragmented, passed down through families of masons or held. Julian spent weeks chasing rumors, bribing clerks, and searching through dusty municipal records. Finally, he found his lead, a disgraced royal cartographer named Antoine Dubois, a man said to have been driven mad by his work mapping the quarries years ago. He was rumored to live in a crumbling tenement in the most squalid part of Paris, a world away from the gilded cage of Versailles. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling of coal smoke and unwashed bodies. The buildings leaned against each other for support, blotting out the sun. He found the address and knocked on a splintered door. After a long silence, the door creaked open a few inches. A pair of sharp, intelligent eyes peered out from the darkness. "What do you want?" The voice was dry, like... "I am looking for Antoine Dubois," Julian said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was told you might have maps of the old quarries." The door opened wider. The man, Antoine, was skeletal, wrapped in a threadbare robe. His room was a chaotic mess of books, charts, and strange artifacts. He gestured for Julian to enter. "Maps?" Antoine chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "They are charts of the underworld. They are warnings." Julian pulled out the sketch of the symbol. He held it out to Antoine. "I need to know what this means." Antoine stared at the drawing, and all the mockery drained from his face. He became deathly still. He looked from the paper to Julian, his eyes searching the young man's face. "Where did you find this?" "On the foundational plans of..." Antoine sank into a chair, his breath shallow. "So the pact still holds," he whispered, more to himself than to Julian. "What pact?" Julian pressed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What does this symbol mean?" Antoine looked up, his eyes filled with a weary sorrow. "It is the sigil of the custodes, Ossium, the guardians of the bones. It represents the spear is the authority of the king, reaching down from the world of light. The serpent is the ancient power of the earth, the darkness below. One cannot exist without the other, Versailles. Its light is so bright because it casts the longest shadow, a shadow that must be anchored, managed, or it will swallow the sun itself." Julian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room. Antoine let out that dry laugh again, empty. "Oh, my boy, they weren't always empty. And soon they will be full again. The cemeteries of Paris are overflowing. The dead are pushing at the gates of the living. Les innocents Saint Fayen, Dumont, they are cesspools of disease, the ground bloated with generations of bodies, the king and his ministers. They see a sanitation." Antoine stood and walked to a heavy wooden chest. He unlocked it and pulled out a rolled-up chart, far more detailed and unsettling than any map Julian had ever seen. He spread it on the table. It showed the familiar layout of Paris, but beneath it a second city was drawn in stark black ink, a sprawling, chaotic network of tunnels and caverns that dwarfed the city above. "This is the true and here," he pointed to a specific, vast section of the labyrinth, "is where the bones will go. They will be brought from the overflowing cemeteries, millions of them, and given a new home, not buried, but arranged, catalogued, watched over." "Why?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would anyone do that?" "Because a kingdom of the dead requires order just like a kingdom of the living," Antoine explained. "A forgotten bone still holds a memory. 6 million souls piled together without purpose or respect. Their silent scream would tear the city apart. It would poison the foundations of the kingdom. The custodies were formed centuries ago to prevent this. They are the silent shepherds of the silent flock. They ensure the dead remain at peace, so that the living may prosper. And for their work, they demand only one thing. What does Versailles have to do with this? Antoine's finger traced a line from the palace, extending for miles until it pointed directly at the heart of the mapped catacombs. Versailles is the ultimate expression of the sun's power, life order, absolute authority. It is a massive weight on the world of the living to maintain the balance. An equal anchor must be placed in the world of the dead. The custodies are a Versailles of bone. The construction of one necessitates the construction of the other. The sigil you found is the seal of that pact made between the first guardian and the first king. Each new king renews it. Louis believes he is building a palace. In truth, he is building one half of a kingdom. The map was a key, and it had unlocked a door into a world Julian couldn't have imagined. This secret, this pact, went deeper than any quarry, all the way to the very foundations of the throne itself. If you are finding this descent into history's shadows as fascinating as I am, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It tells us you want more stories from the forgotten corners of the past. Now, let's follow Julian back into the dark. He felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. All his life, he had looked up at the sun, at the king, at the glorious palace rising towards the heavens. Now he was being told to look down into the suffocating dark to find the true nature of power. "I have to see it," Julian said, his voice firm. "I have to go down there." Antoine studied him for a long moment. "The void changes people. You go down as an architect of the sun." "I'm not a visitor," Julian replied, a newfound conviction in his voice. "I'm part of this somehow. That symbol, it found me. I have to know why." Seeing the determination in Julian's eyes, Antoine sighed. "Very well, but you will not go in blind. There are rules in the kingdom below, laws older than France itself. You break them at your peril." For the next week, he taught him the secret language of the cataphiles, the signs scratched into the stone that meant safe passage, danger ahead, or do not enter. He taught him how to navigate by the feel of the air and the subtle drafts that whispered through the tunnels, how to listen to the silence for the sound of shifting rock or other things. "Never take anything from below," Antoine warned sternly. "Not a stone. You are a guest in their house, show respect. And never, ever lose your light. Your torch is your life. If it goes out, pray for a quick end." He also spoke of the different zones of the catacombs. There were the known quarries, dangerous but navigable. And then there were the deeper levels, the catacombs beneath the catacombs, tunnels that hadn't felt the touch of a human foot in centuries. "They are not men like you or I anymore. They have spent too long in the silence and the dark. They are something else." Finally, the night came. Antoine gave Julian a tinderbox, a bundle of torches, a wineskin of water, and a crude map copied from his own. The entrance was not a grand portal, but a forgotten well shaft in the cellar of a derelict brewery on the outskirts of Paris. The air that rose from it was cold and ancient. "Remember the rules, Julian," Antoine said, his voice grave. "And trust your instincts. The stone speaks to those who listen." Julian took a deep breath, lit his first torch, and began his descent. The ladder was old and slick with damp. The circle of grey light from the world above grew smaller and smaller until it was just a distant star, and then it was gone. He was alone in the He landed on a floor of soft earth. The silence was the first thing that struck him. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that muffled the sound of his own breathing, his own heartbeat. The air was cool and still. The torchlight threw monstrous, dancing shadows against the tunnel walls. The rock was a pale, creamy white, the limestone that had built Paris. It felt like being in the... He consulted the map, its lines seeming like a frail human fantasy in this overwhelming reality. He began to walk, his footsteps unnervingly loud in the profound silence. The tunnels branched and twisted, a disorienting maze designed to confound the living. Hours passed. The world above ceased to exist. His reality became the narrow circle of light, the feel. He saw the cataphile signs Antoine had taught him, faint scratches in the stone, and they were a small comfort, a sign that others had passed this way and survived. But then the tunnels began to change. The clean-cut quarry walls gave way to something more primal, more terrifying. He had reached the first of the ossuaries. The transition was jarring. He turned a corner, and the wall of limestone was skulls and femurs stacked with a chilling geometric precision. They were arranged in patterns, creating a grotesque tapestry of mortality. Rows of vacant eye sockets stared out at him from the darkness. Femurs were stacked like firewood, interspersed with the macabre punctuation of grinning skulls. It was a library of the dead, and the sheer scale of it was staggering, the population of Paris rendered down to its essential, eternal components. A sign was carved into the rock above the entrance. Arfiti, c'est ici l'empire de la mort. Stop, this is the empire of death. He was no longer in a quarry, he was in a necropolis. As he walked deeper, the arrangements became more elaborate. Altars made of skulls, arches of bone chapels where tibias formed delicate latticework. This wasn't just storage, this was art, this was devotion. This was the work of the custodies. He felt a growing sense of being watched. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a silent, waiting presence. The eyes of the skulls seemed to follow him. Was it his imagination? Or did the air stir? He looked at his own hand, at the skin and muscle and blood, and it seemed like a temporary fragile costume. Here, bone was the only truth. He pressed on, driven by a need to understand. He had to find the heart of this place, the center of the custodies' power. According to Antoine's map, there was a central chamber, a place called the Sanctum Osseum, where the oldest bones were kept. A sudden cold draught swept through the tunnel, almost extinguishing the flame. It carried with it a faint sound, a low, guttural chanting. It was coming from somewhere up ahead. His blood ran cold. He had found them. He doused his torch, plunging himself into a terrifying, absolute blackness. He didn't dare breathe. He crept forward, using the wall to guide him. He rounded a bend and saw a faint, flickering light ahead. He pressed himself into a recess in the wall, peering around the edge. What he saw would be seared into his memory for the rest of his life. He was looking into a vast, circular cavern. In the center, a ring of standing stones, far older than any quarry, surrounded a deep, dark well. The chamber was lit by dozens of torches, casting a hellish, orange glow on the walls, which were not made of stacked bone, but were covered in intricate carvings, depictions of kings and skeletons, suns and serpents. And standing in a circle around the well were figures in dark, hooded robes. The custodies, they were chanting in a language he didn't recognize, an ancient, resonant tongue. One figure stood before an altar made of a single, massive block of black basalt. He was taller than the others, his robe adorned with the sigil of the serpent and the spear. The Grand Master on the altar lay a collection of objects, a golden crown, tarnished with age, and a human skull, yellowed and ancient. As the chanting reached a crescendo, the Grand Master raised his hands. The sun wax, the kingdom of light expands, and the weight grows heavy upon the world. A new anchor is required. The other guardians responded in unison, a booming chorus. The balance must be kept. We are the shepherds of the silent flock. The Grand Master continued. We are the guardians of the long sleep. The world above forgets the price of its light. They build their palaces of gold and mirror, and the chorus answered. But we remember. The Grand Master's voice dropped to a low, intense whisper. We remember the pact. A sun for a shadow, a palace for a tomb, a king for a kingdom. We have gathered the bones, we have built the walls of the new necropolis now. We must consecrate it. We must feed the shadow, so the sun does not burn itself out. He picked up the ancient skull from the altar. He gave his wisest counselor to the earth to become the first silent king. Every generation the price must be paid, a life for a life, a soul for a kingdom. Julian's mind reeled a sacrifice. The pact required a human sacrifice. This was the true cost of Versailles' glory. Suddenly, another figure was dragged into the center of the circle by two of the guardians. The man he wore the livery of a court official. Julian recognized him. It was a minor functionary from the Ministry of Finance, a man named de Valois, known for his ambition and his public mockery of old superstitions. It seemed his ambition had led him into the wrong dark alley. This one sought to find our secrets for his own gain, the Grand Master declared, his voice ringing with contempt. He sees only he would fracture the pact and sell the bones of the dead for a title. He is an agent of chaos. He will serve the balance in another way. His life will be the mortar that binds the new foundation. His soul will be the first lamp lit in the Versailles of bone. Julian wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but he was frozen, a helpless observer. He was an architect, a man of plans. What could he do against these zealots? The guardians forced de Valois to his knees before the well. The Grand Master raised a long ceremonial dagger, its obsidian blade seeming to drink the torchlight. Julian closed his eyes, his stomach churning. He heard the Grand Master's final words, "For the kingdom above, a tribute to the kingdom below, so the balance is kept." He heard a sickening thud. The chanting resumed. Softer now, more mournful. Julian didn't wait to see more. He scrambled back into the darkness, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He fumbled to relight his torch, his hands shaking so violently it took him several attempts. Once the flame caught, he ran. He didn't care about the map, about the signs, about the rules. He just ran, stumbling through the tunnels of bone, the vacant eyes of a million skulls judging his flight. He felt as if the entire empire of the dead was at his heels, a cold, silent pursuit. Hours later, exhausted, bruised, and covered in grime, he saw it, a faint glimmer of light from above, the well shaft. He had never been so grateful to see the... He scrambled up the ladder, not stopping until he was out, breathing the fresh open air of the living world, collapsing onto the grimy floor of the brewery's cellar. He had survived his descent into the underworld, but the man who had climbed out was not the same one who had climbed in. The naive young architect was gone, replaced by someone who had looked into the abyss and seen the terrible truth staring back. He stumbled back to his small room, the splendor of Paris seeming thin and fragile, a painted screen hiding a monstrous reality. He couldn't look at Versailles the same way. Every sun-kissed stone, every gilded cornice seemed to be dripping with blood. The laughter of the courtiers in the gardens sounded like the chanting of the custodes. He now understood the old mason's words. The serpent of the... He was holding both, and they were tearing him apart. He went to see Antoine, who took one look at Julian's haunted eyes and knew. He listened silently as Julian recounted the horrific ritual he had witnessed. When Julian finished, Antoine nodded slowly. "The price has been paid," he said softly. "For another generation, the balance holds. The sun will continue to shine on Versailles. They are monsters." "Are they?" Antoine asked, his gaze steady. "Or are they gardeners pruning a single branch to save the entire forest? They see a larger reality than we do. They have guarded this secret for 1,000 years. What is one ambitious fool's life compared to the stability of a kingdom, the peace of 6 million souls?" "There has to be another way," Julian insisted. "No," Antoine said. "Great light requires great darkness. Great life is fed by great death. You cannot have one without the other. You, my boy, were not meant to see this. The symbol found you for a reason. It has chosen you. Chosen me for what? I do not know. The patterns of fate are not for us to read, but you now carry the knowledge. You are a part of the secret that makes you either a threat to the to become one of those robed figures, to spend his life in the eternal night, to accept the necessity of their bloody work." The idea was repellent. He was a builder, a creator of light and space, not a guardian of death and decay yet. He couldn't unsee what he had seen. He couldn't unknow what he now knew. He was trapped between two worlds. In the weeks that followed, he threw himself into the designs for a new fountain, a marvel of hydraulic engineering that would shoot water 100 feet into the air. He tried to focus on the sun, on the beauty, on the rational order of Versailles, but the shadows clung to him. He would see the sigil in the patterns of the marble floors. He would hear the chanting in the whisper of the wind through the colonnades. He became withdrawn and paranoid. Lebrun, his master, grew concerned. "You have a darkness in you, boy," he said one day, placing a hand on Julian's shoulder. "Whatever you are wrestling with, leave it in the earth. Our work is to rise above it, to build towards the sun." Julian knew Lebrun meant well, but his words were a bitter irony. Rise above it. The sun itself was anchored to that darkness. Then came the message. It was a small roll of parchment, left on his drafting table, sealed not with wax, but with a daub of black clay, impressed with the sigil of the serpent and spear. His blood turned to ice. With trembling hands he broke the seal. The message was short, written in a stark, angular script. "The balance requires a builder. The sanctum needs repair. Your knowledge is required." They knew who he was. They knew where to find him. He was being pulled back into their world. He showed the message to Antoine. The old cartographer read it, and his face grew grim. "This has never happened before," he murmured. "They do not ask for help from the world above. They are self-sufficient." "What do they mean?" "The sanctum needs repair," Julian asked. "The well," Antoine said, his eyes distant. "The place of... If something is wrong with it, the consequences could be catastrophic. Unrest among the dead. Instability in the world of the living plagues. Madness, civil unrest. The shadow could rise up and poison the sun. So I have to go back," Julian said, a sense of dread washing over him. "You have no choice," Antoine confirmed. "To refuse is to be seen as an enemy, and the custodes deal with their..." That night, Julian returned to the abandoned brewery. This time, he didn't need to find the well shaft. A hooded figure was waiting for him in the shadows. The figure didn't speak, but simply gestured for Julian to follow. They descended into the earth, the guardian moving with a silent, unnatural grace that Julian could not hope to match. They walked for what felt like days, through passages Julian had never seen before. Finally, they arrived at the great cavern, the Sanctum Osseum. The Grand Master was waiting for him, standing before the dark well. His hood was down, and Julian was shocked to see a face that was not monstrous, but ascetic and intelligent, his eyes holding an ancient, weary wisdom. "The architect," the Grand Master said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "We have been watching you. You see the world in lines of..." "What is wrong?" Julian asked, his voice sounding small in the cavern. The Grand Master led him to the edge of the well. "Look!" Julian peered into the darkness. The well was not a simple hole. Its walls were lined with stones carved with thousands of spiraling sigils, pulsing with a faint, sickly luminescence. But in one section the stones had cracked. A large fissure ran through the wall of the well, and from it a dark, viscous substance was seeping out, and a low, dissonant hum vibrated in the air. "The conduit is broken," the Grand Master explained. "The pact was sealed with blood and stone. The stone is failing. The energy of the Shadow Kingdom is leaking uncontrolled. It is poisoning the silence. The dead are... The court is rife with paranoia and intrigue. The balance is tipping." "How can I fix this?" Julian asked, studying the fissure. "I am a builder, not a sorcerer. The principles are the same," the Grand Master replied. "Order must be imposed on chaos. A keystone is failing, it must be replaced, but the stone required is not of this earth. It must be a stone that has been baptized in the sun, that has absorbed the light and power of the world above. It must be brought from the heart of Versailles." Julian stared at him. Aghast, "You want me to steal from the palace?" "Not steal, reclaim. When the palace was built, a single foundation stone was consecrated by the king himself.